Hello and welcome to the Securing Your Business webinar series. We're excited to kick off today, and I'd like to first tell you a few Zoom housekeeping rules and ways to engage. First of all, we hope that you will take this time to introduce yourself in the chat box. Let us know who you are and what business or nonprofit you're representing. The best way to do this is by setting field to all panels today. You'll find that your audio is off and video is off during this webinar. That is as planned, and we will have an opportunity for you at the end of this webinar during the Q&A portion to unmute yourself and ask your questions. For now, we'd love you to go ahead and ask your questions as well as your comments in the chat box. We will be monitoring that throughout the presentation, and we'll take time to answer those questions at the end. Please know that today we're going to be going over a lot of dense and important financial information. We're going to do our best to cover as much as possible, but bear with us. Be aware that we will be recording this. This will be available on our website as well as on Facebook, Evergreen, so you can reference it as needed. We also will be able to share the slide deck as well as resources from today's call. So please know those steps as we go through the details of today's webinar. It looks like we have quite a few participants on the call. I'd like to go ahead and get started by introducing the President and CEO of the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce, Betsy Gardner-Eckbert.
Amy, thank you. I'm so pleased to be able to offer this content in collaboration with our team today. And I want to thank Amy Morgan and Tiffany Cahill, who run our webinar program behind the scenes. They do an absolutely fantastic job. And I'm really proud that we've been able to make this content consistently available Monday through Thursday at 4 o'clock to our community. Our mission at the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce is to convene people and ideas for the benefit of our businesses and our community. And we are delighted to be able to do that in a virtual setting while we're all still at home. And you are in for a very special treat today because Michael Gelman has taught me a lot about nonprofit fiscal strategies and management. And I know you're going to enjoy his conversation. So this purpose of this webinar series is to help you navigate through this period of hyper change. We've had speakers ranging from our United States Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy to local economist Dr. Sean Snaith from UCF's Economic Opportunity Institute. We've had people from the mayor's office at the county level and local business owners with creative pivot point solutions. We're continuing to offer these webinars through the end of the month at least to help the business community navigate through the COVID-19 pandemic and ensuing effects. And we'll continue to source experts through the community to share information, best practices, and practical advice. So today we have Michael Gelman, who's an independent fiscal and financial strategist for nonprofit organizations. He is the founding principal partner for Fiscal Strategies for Nonprofits, LLC, where the primary focus is helping legacy organizations and new organizations build and achieve a sustainable and financially healthy future. Michael has more than 35 years experience in nonprofit fiscal, financial, and accounting systems, working as a chief financial, fiscal, and management consultant. He is a past president of the Greater Washington Society of CPAs and has also served on the Finance Administration Section Council of the American Society of Association Executives. Michael currently serves on various nonprofit boards, including the B'nai B'rith International as the current treasurer and the Greater Washington Society of CPAs as president emeritus. He is out of the Washington, D.C. area, and in full disclosure, is a consultant to the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce following my over 3-year experience working with him to advise me on the optimal fiscal management of our finances here at the Winter Park Chamber of Commerce. I know you're in for a huge treat today. Michael Gelman, welcome, and thank you for making time to be with our audience today.
Okay, thank you, Betsy. And I hope you can hear me okay.
We can.
And I just want to add just a real on the background, just so you know where it's coming today, what we're going through. I was in a public accounting my whole career. I am I would consider myself a normal person. I am a CPA, but I'm not a tax and auditor. I will be going through experiences. I work alongside organizations, as Betsy described, even when I was in public accounting up until 3 years ago. I started out as an intern in nonprofits. I caught the bug. I've always thought of myself first and foremost as a project manager. It comes that thing through a financial side. And you'll take a look at that. In this new platform, we're spending time just doing consulting work alongside the C-suite, as Betsy explained, like we do with Winter Park a little bit. And then I spend about a third of my time teaching classes. My home base is Georgetown University. I teach out of a couple of different schools there, and then the IOM program for ASAE and their CAE program, and for a lot of national organizations like the National Urban League and Volunteers for America and groups like that. I say all that because it brings in, I get to sit with a lot of different organizations. The concepts we're going to go through here today, I'm going to screen share, and I just want to make sure that this is up and running, and that you can see the PowerPoint slides. We're going to go through this. Good, excellent.
Looks good.
Thank you. We're going to go through here. Think of this as the resources. I would like to bring your attention to the bottom. The things, concepts we're talking about on sc4nonprofits.com. A number of us who teach got together from Georgetown, a couple other places, and we started getting some articles, tools, blogs, Q&As out. I encourage you to go here. The things we have here today in the template, we're going to be talking about the framework. We're going to try to save the last 10 minutes for that. Is up on that website, and I think Tiffany's going to make it available to everybody towards the end, and such. And this is my email up here, so you'll be able to see that. Everything on that website is new. We just launched it the last week of March, as everything was cascading with COVID-19, and I think you'll find a lot of information. It's legal, financial, fiscal, and governance information up there. Okay. So with that, let's go ahead and get rolling through the presentation. We're going to talk about hyperchange and how it impacts us in our decision making right now. We're going to look at a framework. A lot of what we're doing is difficult decisions that we're making, but we have to be ultra targeted. It's not just for financial professionals. It's really geared for senior management and nonprofits, and communicating that information to the nonprofit organizations and their boards. Couple learning objectives, and you'll see there's a 4-point plan I'm going to take you through in a minute, but I just want to talk about this. We're going to break this down about how we have to make quick decisions and how that's affecting us. That second bullet point there, really important, that most organizations want to fall in one of two spots. They're either what we call a healthy organization with a lot of assets, or they're an organization that's financially maybe not healthy. They're struggling, they're living from payroll to payroll, accounts payable is a constant nightmare and such. So we're going to look at that, and it's not first by accident. Then we're going to take a look at the vulnerability of our funding sources. Every organization's impacted by this, but in different degrees. And we're going to compare and contrast that with another volatility we have to talk about, is our demand. Demand for services are going up and down. We have some things that are being canceled. We have pressure for providing additional services. Then we're going to cycle back and spend a little bit of time on operating reserves. And I want to talk about that, and it's really important. And then towards the end, you'll see on the last bullet, we're going to save time for the framework. As we go through this presentation, I'll keep an eye on the time. It's really a 4-step process. Step number 5 is saving time to see how this all plays out through the framework. Not making the framework available to you up front, because I just want you to concentrate on these pieces. So when you see the framework, it'll all come together, okay? I do want to say something, this is very selfish, but I'm going to say it. I developed this because as things were cascading in March, I was literally on Georgetown University's campus. I teach a lot of classes at the beginning of March there. I'm just adjunct because I'm on the road usually a lot of times. And the classes were canceled the day I was there, and we're just like scrambling. The email went out while I was in class. up there, and everybody's like looking at their phone and said, what just happened? They just like closed the campus. Now, we were able to stay the rest of the day and finish the classes, but it's just an evolving world. So we're going to talk about the starting point, the 3 factors and the learning objectives. Timing is critical. I do want to spend a few minutes on operating reserves. I think this is what we really got to protect. And then we'll go to the framework. Amy, Tiffany, just let me know if questions start to pop up. We'll have some time, and I encourage questions as we go through. So with that, let's get to step 1. During these extraordinary times, as you can see here, we're confronted with a lot of changes, and it's almost, well, no, it's not almost, it is overwhelming right now. If you start to think about all the dominoes that fall over in our decisions that we have to make and things, it just becomes overwhelming. And what I want to argue here is that if we do, and I'm totally biased, I'm an accountant, okay? Well, I'm not, I'm a financial consultant, CPA. But I think right now we have to overweight, we have to overfavor, and we have to observe all the decisions we're making through the lens of the financial impact on the organization. So this is my number 1 priority right here. And I believe that right now, organizations are most at risk in this area, that in a very short period of time, we've already seen organizations that didn't make it through to the, we're getting close to the end of April here, that won't make it through to the end of April. That a financial misstep here will take them down. And we don't want anybody to get sued. We don't want any compliance issues and all these things, but there's nothing that's as quick as, hurting the financial position of an organization. So what are we dealing in this, and why is it so uncertain? And if we look back to the last 2 big debt crises that had parallels to this, the 9/11 crisis, and the banking crisis of 2008 and 9, there's one uniform thing that I was physically like battered on, and I'm not having it happen this time. The one thing we all got wrong during those crises is that we didn't see how deep and long the impact scope and everything there. And when we all look back, we all burned through more of our reserves or more assets than we probably should have. We should have pulled back. We'll talk about this when we get to our operating reserves. So see my statement down here. Remember this. We have to adopt a conservative approach. We have to favor and overweight the impact of management decisions have on protecting the financial position. And we tell everybody up front we're doing that. I think it brings a sense of calmness and purpose to a lot of things that we have to do right now. And I'm really worried about, even the strong organizations. I don't want them to come out of this thing in such a weakened position that they're a small piece of what they used to be. Okay, and there's one given that we want the organization to be here in the future. Yes, we could do more now, but we could really hurt the organization, its financial position. And if we protect that financial position and hope and position the organization so it can be around another 20 years, we will be able to do much more in the community. Okay, so that's the first piece I wanted to go through there. Amy, this would be a good time to pull up the first polling question. It's a pretty simple question. Thank you, Amy. You can see, do you agree with this concept of overweighting towards the financial position of organization? Do you feel that's where organizations are most at risk, where they could really, hurt themselves for the future, might survive this, but survive this at, great cost and come out much smaller on the other side? If you would just sort of yes or no, we're only going to leave this up for a little bit. In the past, when I ask these questions, most people do agree. If there's something that you think about that might be a different strategy, you can go ahead and type it in. Amy and Tiffany, you can share a little bit of those.
All right, it looks like we have over 50% that have voted so far. So far, 1 has commented no, and for that person, we would really like to know an alternative strategy in the comments. I'll give it a moment or 2, and then I'll publish the results so everyone can see them. And I'll be sure to share if we get any comments in the chat box, Mike.
Okay. Yeah, and the one thing I've learned in the finance area, there's never 100%. There's always some situation where it might be something different and such, but I'd love to learn from you and such. It's always, I think most people do agree. I know I am biased. I agree to that 100%, but I just really I see organizations that have taken a real hit financially, and you'll see this as I talk. So perfect. Amy, I'm going to move on. I'm going to close that screen, and move on. Okay?
You got it.
Okay, good. So we're going to go to step 2 now. Let's make sure it's there. Okay, and we're going to look at these 3 critical factors. I'm going to lay these out for you, but it'll really look great when we get to pull up the spreadsheet and see how they pop in. There's 3 steps. The order of these steps, I'm very conscious of. For most organization, we have to attack this, how we're going to, move forward through this financial exercise we're doing in this order. Looking to determine whether the organization's in a financially healthy position or, strong position or weak position. And we're going to explore the vulnerability of your funding sources. And everybody's being impacted, but different funding sources are being impacted in different ways, both in volume and timing. And then the last step we're going to look at is demand volatility. Things that are being canceled, that's a decrease in demand. Meanwhile, the services and things in the community, people might be wanting more of a service. And then we got this middle piece where we're doing services in a different way. Every in-person, event that you move to an online event like this, there's pros and cons to it. The pro of it is, and it's really interesting. Do you know that most attendance at churches, synagogues, all these things, the attendance is going up because they've moved, the virtual services online, and versus people, sitting in the pews. And so that's a good thing and a bad thing. The good thing, we got a lot more people there, but it's harder to connect with them online than in person. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. When we see the template, we'll take a look, and we're going to come up with sort of an indication of your financial health that you'll be able to share with your board, and they'll be able to see it. It'll be plain English. Okay. The short answer to the financial health question is looking at operating reserves. But if you were to step back, and this is sort of a funny way to say it, I open up and look at a financial statement. I want to make one comment, and Betsy's heard this a million times, so I apologize. The financial health of an organization only shows up on the balance sheet. Okay, and I know we get tunnel vision on budgets and income statements and such, and it's very important watching that. But you can be having a great budget year, and you can be underwater on your balance sheet. You can be having trouble paying bills. Your accounts payable continue to grow and all those kinds of things. Okay, and we're going to explore a little bit about what makes a balance sheet strong or weak. But at the end of the day, one universal thing is strong nonprofit balance sheets. Those organizations have built up operating reserves. And weak financial balance sheets, usually they have little to no operating reserves, and some are underwater where they have negative operating reserves. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. So that is my look at that. I'm going to break operating reserves down in a few minutes. So just to save time, I'm going to move ahead a little bit. The only thing I do want to talk about is this is a good time to consider if you have a formal operating reserve policy in place, good for you. Most organizations don't. The larger organizations all do. And that's a policy that defines why you build up operating reserves. Okay, in terms of mission, our operating reserve policy isn't to build $2 million. Our operating reserve policy is to have, 6 months of membership programs in operating reserves. It's to have, 100 meals for 200 individuals to serve for, 3 months. That's our mission. And then we would convert that to a dollar amount. And then we convert the dollar amount to a percent of the budget. So we do have this thing. A hard number we can compare to. The third component of an operating reserve policy is to define what you do when you're at your reserve goal, above your reserve goal, below your reserve goal. And then the fourth one is a monitoring piece. But back to those first 2 pieces, I do, and we'll come back to this in a little bit, what makes a weak or a strong organization. The National Operating Reserve Initiative, the NORI project done by the United Way and the Urban Institute, it's about 7-8 years ago done now. I was on part of that. There was a lot of nonprofit organizations and colleges and universities that participated. We only came up with one given, and it wasn't what the perfect operating reserve goal is, but we came up with one given. And I'm going to slow down here for a minute. You got to write this down. That organization universally, or almost universally, organizations that have less than 3 months of operating reserves built up, we all consider would be in a weakened position. Okay, so that means that, the low end of an operating reserve goal would be 3 months. C6 chambers membership type based organizations, they're usually trying for an operating reserve of 6 to 12 months. C3 public charitable organizations, C4 advocacy groups are in that 3 to 6 month range because of just the way they operate. So 6 months, sort of like, I like to see that. I work with groups that have 30 months, 40 months, 5 years of operating reserves. And I've seen more than a few. Well, if you look at statistics, more than half the physical number of nonprofits and organizations have negative operating reserves. So they're underwater. How can their balance sheet survive? We're going to take a look at that in a few minutes. But what happens is it's more of a C3 problem because they have restricted funds that are in excess of their unrestricted funds. So let's go on to the middle bucket here, which is looking at the sensitivity of your funding sources. And this next slide, I really love. Okay, to me, and I had this happen on Georgetown's campus. We were like, everybody scrambling, people were panicking. And one participant in the program, this wasn't students. I mean, they were students, but they were all senior execs coming in for our leadership program at Georgetown. Some of them had already convened emergency board meetings, and they were coming in and saying, well, we don't know how this is happening, but we think it's going to affect us, and our funding is going to be down 20%. And what that says to me is like, that's just a wild ass guess. What I got to, even though we're still doing wild ass guesses, is this 3-bucket approach. And it could be 4, and you don't have to use my terminology of rock solid, vulnerable, and shaky. And that's where you can adjust the spreadsheet to work for you, the template. But what I'm trying to say is we do have funding sources either for timing or for the nature of the funding might not be changing at all. You might have a set of grants that are already approved. It's federal or state grants that are rock solid. They might even be increasing because of some of the CARES and the Families First Act, okay? And like membership organizations, it's really interesting here to compare 9/11 with what's happening now, just because of the timing of the fiscal year. Think about this for a minute. It's really cool. 9/11 happened in September. Okay, this COVID crisis basically started hitting the business community, nonprofits, really hard pretty early in March. They were exactly 6 months apart. Organizations had a 12-month renewal cycle on memberships. They were membership-based organizations. At 9/11, the organizations that had 1231 memberships, they were okay because they had already renewed those members. Backwards. The June 30th members, they had already renewed those. The organizations that had 1231 when 9/11 happened, they were anywhere from 15 days to 20 or 30 days away from starting their dues renewal cycle, and they were really hurt. Now the opposite's happening. The 1231 memberships are all in the door, and the groups, I can't tell you how many chambers I've talked to that they start their membership renewal cycle, is a July 1, June 30, and they start pre-billing those. Most times you're going out 90 days, 60 days, 75 days ahead of time. And what do? That's another whole conversation. I will sneak one comment in. My knee-jerk reaction is don't get off cycle, but be there for people. Okay, you can have a vulnerable source, okay? And you can have a shaky source. A shaky source is like all events that were just happening, in late March and April, we might have to cancel. They might not be able to hold those. Okay, and vulnerable are sources like contributions and things that we know they're going to be affected, but we're not sure how much. And it sort of just gets you to do this. So I think we have time for one more polling question. I think this one's really important. This is one of the best things I love on the spreadsheet. Do you like this comment of looking at the sensitivity of your funding sources? Thank you for launching. And if you have you'll see some other, we're going to talk about another one here, but let me know if you agree or disagree. This has been a huge help with messaging to boards and just talking with staff and making our decisions. While you're answering that, I do like the optics of saying to a board member, we've looked at all our funding sources. We've put them in 3 or 4 categories. This is how we analyze them. And it just shows a thoughtful approach. Okay, Amy, can you shut that down? Yep. Okay, good. And I appreciate that. And everybody agrees. And I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Okay, one more factor here. Hold on. That we're going to go through is the demand sensitivity. And this breaks down into 2 pieces. And you'll see this on the spreadsheet in a few minutes. And again, don't quote me on the top 5. Sometimes I have 3, sometimes I have 7 up there. But now I'm looking at it not from a funding perspective. I'm looking at it from a demand perspective. Okay. And it can fall into any of these categories: services, events, programs, activities. Some of it's at capacity. If we've had to downsize the staff, we can't provide as many services as we were before. And if you look at, I do a lot of C3 entities that are doing clinics, they're providing meal programs, housing, workforce development, and all this. The demand in the community is skyrocketing. I was, one of the groups in my Georgetown class was an Easter Seals group out of the Midwest. It was just heartbreaking. The demand for services literally over about a 2-week time period, I talked to her later, had doubled in size. Meanwhile, thank God it wasn't her first estimate. Her initial estimate was that she had lost 90% of her funding going forward. It still was really bad. They went down about 75%. Demand was going through the roof. They were applying for other funds. So we started to work through it, but they were going in opposite directions. Part 2 of this down here, the controllable, uncontrollable, I don't use all the time. Some groups really, this helps people to think you've been thoughtful and break it down, some not. What I mean by this is there's some decisions we're making that we do not control. If all our March and April and maybe even our May events are canceled, that's not something we called. Okay. Now the controllable ones, what are we doing with those same events? Can we reschedule, launch them later on? Do they have to go online? That's a controllable decision. What I like to do this down, it helps the board. It's like we're overwhelmed with all these decisions, but if we say we did this and this on these uncontrollable ones because they were basically done for us, and we moved quickly to, the force majeure moves, with like hotel contracts and things and stuff. And more importantly, I would say to boards, concentrate on the controllable ones, because that's where we need your help. We want to see if you agree or disagree with the decisions we're making. Okay. So let's go into timing and implementation. And I got one more brand new concept to go over with you. It's called super short versus short term. Okay. I like this. I think it adds to the sense of purpose and calm. And we'll see what that means here. What it does is we're making a gazillion decisions. It's really tough, but I'd like to help the board and even staff and myself saying, what are the ones we got to concentrate on right now? And there's some decisions that we can defer or delay and, move them off to the side and keep them in our peripheral vision. These brackets are general. I'm trying to make a comment that will work for all nonprofits. It doesn't work, but generally the larger the organization, the tighter these time periods. So really large mega-sized groups, we're looking at 7 to 10 days up here. And then this will go up to 60 days. And we're looking at these decisions, and it helps us to read and react to these, what we're positioning for these. I just like this. I think it works good. It's worked for me. I've used this spreadsheet and these strategies with a lot of different organizations, and then doing TAs, technical assistance with groups off of these webinars, people calling. And I literally went old school, printed out the template, and I have it sitting there, and I'm checking these boxes, and you'll see short and super short. Okay. I like the super short. I just think it helps boards to say, calm down, take a look, really concentrate on the super short ones, and we're not forgetting about the ones that are in the short term. One quick comment here. I was talking with Betsy about this a little bit. It's a sort of a webinar on its own, but talking about pivoting to short-term rolling 90-day, 3-month budgets. It's almost like fiscal years don't matter anymore. You have a June 30 year end. I had an organization, we were meeting, the finance committee, it was a large organization. They were meeting in late March to go over the February numbers, and it was like, who cares? They were having one of the best years ever, yet they took a dive in March, and they got 3 more months to go, And so really what we got to do is we got to concentrate, go almost cash basis, go on 3-month rolling budgets. And on that website, there's some information on that and things to share. And we could be getting together on that in the future. Keeping an eye on the time. I do want to slow down here a minute and talk about operating reserves. Financially strong versus weak. This is my bias again, but I believe, and I put it in here, I firmly believe that this is the one benchmark on balance sheets where you can tell, you can separate the financially strong from the financially weak. Okay. and having an operating reserve policy is critical. And if you don't already, on regular financial dashboards, we're not here looking at it, I always like to have that operating reserve up on that financial dashboard so boards can see where it is and where it's trending. Okay, so I'm going to state the obvious. Organizations that have substantial operating reserves have a whole different set of taxes considered than organizations who are underwater or have little to no operating reserves or really cash tight. Organizations that are sitting on a ton of cash have reserves. They have a whole different set of tactics. Organizations that don't have those reserves, they don't have those tactics. Either set of those organizations don't want to hear about the other organization. So that bifurcation happens on the spreadsheet, and we go there quickly and determine whether we're in a weak or strong position. Operating reserves are great, having them, but with that, we can screw up because we will look back and we're going to see, did we guess right or not? Did we use our operating reserves judiciously during a time of great uncertainty? And we won't know till 2-3 years from now. Look in the middle of the page is metering out thing. I just released an article last week on the Sustain SC4N website. Take a look at it on how to meter this out with some strategies and tactics around that. I will tell you the simple part of it is I go real conservative and then I keep backing off of it until I can see recovery. No operating reserve can protect you from a permanent or long-term downturn. Operating reserves are there for short-term changes, and by every means that I can think of, we are not in a short-term change. So we should be very judicious with our operating reserves. And an article I just released last week talks about this. And we're still doing cost containment. Organizations without operating reserves, cash tight, accounts payable growing, they struggle to go from pay period to pay period. They got to move to cost containment strategies really quick. Okay, so good thing is good to have operating reserves. The bad thing is we got to really be careful with how we manage those. And no matter what we do, we're going to look back and say, I was really tainted by the last couple of downturns. I think almost across the board, we burned through operating reserves probably faster than we should have, knowing for the length of those turns. So I'm trying to be a little more conservative or give guidance out that now. Okay. Financially weak organizations, they got to move really quickly to cost containment. We got to protect the organization. We just don't have those fallback positions. You could build up, deficits really fast and get in the hole. Accounts payable are going to skyrocket as you try to make payroll. So they're looking at it, unfortunately, some sort of downsizing, maybe in stages or such, and you're matching that up with your revenue. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes left. Or such, Amy, I might steal a couple of seconds of time. I do want to go through the framework. The framework is broken into 3 sections. Step 1, financial health. Step 2, the operating reserve position. And step 3 are super short-term or health drivers for actions. In step 1, we're going to go through the 3 metrics we just talked about right here. Step 2, we're going to check a box whether weak, neutral, or strong. You see we used operating reserves as a benchmark. And then step 3, we're going to list our short and super short ones. So with that, I am going to go over here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to pop up the framework and share. Amy, can you confirm that it's up on the screen?
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay. Before we go through the pieces, I literally have made copy, not that I'm not technologically advanced, but I never know who's going to call and I can start scribbling on this thing. The key word here, it's a framework. Okay, take a look. Step 1 is at the top. It's got 3 components. We'll go through that in a second. Step 2 is in the middle. That's the operating reserve position. And you know me, I love dashboards fitting on 1 page. I know it crams a lot in here, but I like the peripheral vision of everything being together. And step 3 is this, our key actions we're going to be taking, and the super short and short. To me, I love the word framework because it implies it's a thoughtful process that we have taken a deliberative approach to come up with a plan of action. But it's a framework. We expect it to change as things on the ground change. And so that's why this spreadsheet was sort of laid out as it is. To me, the most important part was starting with our financial health assessment. If we're strong, we have a whole different set of decisions we can make over here. If we're weak, it impacts us. So what we're doing, listing in strengths and weaknesses, is to demonstrate to you and the board, why you think you're strong and why you're weak. Strong organizations will be sitting on a lot of cash. They will have no debt, little debt, and accounts payable are low. Weak organizations have no cash, accounts payable are growing, and they might have debt and such. Another one we see is organizations that have hard assets like buildings. There's a lot, you can be sitting on a lot of unrestricted net assets, but it's tied up in your building. And operating reserves are only made up of liquid assets. So it's current assets minus current liabilities. So I've seen organizations with millions of dollars, but they're building, an organization has $4 million in operating reserves, in unrestricted net assets, but they have a $5 million building on the books, could actually be underwater in their operating reserves. Now, Amy, I did that real quick, take a question, but I think people will see that. Down here, I like the optics of listing what your reserve goal is. Let's say it's 6 months, our reserve goal is 6 months. And if you're a strong organization, you're sitting on 18 months. I usually dump this line right here for most groups. I just like the optics. Our goal is 6 months and we have 18. That tells them. Our goal is 6 months and we're at -2. That tells me something too. Okay. My favorite boxes, these speak for themselves. You start to put in, you could have grants up here, membership, we're sure it's going to be affected somewhat, but not too bad. And we're really worried about our events, sponsored events, things like that. You could have an item in multiple spots. We have grants that are rock solid, and we have a grant from a private foundation that we're worried they're being affected by this crisis, and they're dumping their grants, okay, and so forth. So I like having the 3 boxes. I've seen 1 or 2 that have used a 4-box approach just to break it down. And more than a few didn't like my word shaky, so they replaced that with something else. Then the demand volatility is over here. Again, you're listing your biggest events. This is more driven by volume, not by dollars. Which of these events are changing, demand is going up or going down. And then you can see my controllable, uncontrollable. I dump this. Some groups it works, some it doesn't. I'm sort of partial to it. I like when I can stand up in front of a board and say, look, we had to make a lot of decisions. Some of these were taken out of our hands. The events were canceled right from under us and stuff. And these are the ones we're really concentrating on. We want you to, opine on with us. Okay. Then you go into the middle. It gets this based on this section. You'll check weak, neutral, strong. Again, this needs to be common size to you. Sometimes I drop the neutral box. I don't really like it that much, but usually you're in a weak or a strong position. And then again, this, if your operating reserve policy is 12 months or more, then you would have to adjust these. And then what we can do is help you and the board and staff to figure out what are our here. I only put 4 in here, but usually I have up to 7 key or more here. And we list them and we say, well, this is a super short, we're working on this now. This next one is very important, but we're not going to drop membership dues for another 2 weeks, so we can push this back a little bit. Okay. And that's how it works. I'm sitting right on 440, Amy. How did I do?
You did absolutely great. I'm going to share a link to this financial assessment in the chat box now, if that's okay with you, Mike, so participants can look at it in more detail. Is that okay?
Yes, and they can download it, and they don't have people reach out, send me an email. I'll try to be there for everybody, answer questions, get on the phone with you a little bit, best I can.
We do have time for, yes, go ahead.
One more thing. There's an article I just posted last week on using operating reserves. It goes into a lot of the concepts on operating reserves. I would highly encourage you to go through there. And we're working on a new article on setting up COVID-19 task forces for nonprofits. I think is really important, and use of restricted funds. So take a look. These are all popping.
And just a reminder, we will be sharing all of those resources with you via email. Tiffany Cahill will follow up with everyone on this call with those resources, as well as a survey to let us know how we did today. So with that, we have time for 1 or 2 questions. If anyone would like to chime in and ask Mike a question while we have him. Our first choice for you to engage by asking a question would be to use the raise hand button in Zoom. You can find that on the bottom of your screen, be it on your computer or on your phone. It's a small button that just says raise hand, and that'll let me know that you have a question that you'd like to ask. And I'll go ahead and open up your audio so you can ask your question. Also, Mike, while we're waiting to see if we have any questions, we did have one comment come through, and it was shortly after that first poll. It's from Amy Gordon, and she says, I think if everyone pulls back, then all kinds of business stops. I think it is wise to be very cautious, but since so much B2B happens, it could be very dire if all that dies for a very long time. Just sharing that to see if you had any commentary.
Good. No, I really agree. It's but we also I caution everybody to look carefully at the financial implication. I mean, I think the one thing, whether you're an intern, a staff member, a senior management, or a board member, is try to leave an organization in a healthier position than when we got there. And right now, we change that to try to leave it in the strongest financial position it can be. Because if we're not going to be strong in the future, we're not going to do very much.
Great, thank you. And we haven't had any comments or questions come through yet. So Betsy, I'll go ahead and send it back to you to close us out.
Thank you, Amy, and thank you to Mike Gelman. I know this is pretty high-level stuff, and I really appreciate everyone joining us today. I feel really, really fortunate that you advise us, excuse me, and I'm grateful that we have access to your wisdom. Thank you for sharing your expertise with our audience today, and I really appreciate the wise counsel for the days ahead. I know it's going to be a challenging time for all of us that are responsible for certainly nonprofit P&Ls right now, and just P&Ls in general. Forecasting is going to be a challenge, and I'm grateful for the guidance on how do we use our reserves wisely right now. So we are thrilled that you could be with us today. If you're not currently following us on social media, please follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram. And please subscribe to our newsletter. We send out a newsletter every day at midday right now in response to the crisis, and we would love to have you log on to winterpark.org and put your email address in the box on the homepage, and we'll get a daily briefing out to you. Tomorrow, I'm really thrilled that we are going to have our webinar called Beyond the Brand, sharing Kendra Scott's story and how she built a company that sees the good within ourselves and our customer. Katie Pluto, who is the Southeastern Kendra Scott Regional Manager and Senior Store Manager, is going to be our speaker. And she's going to be talking about a really interesting initiative they've put together to try to respond to the crisis and be embedded in the community. So if you'd like to learn more about what they're doing to react to the crisis from the retail sector, we would love for you to join us tomorrow at 4 p.m. And on Thursday, we have the HR effects of this pandemic, hiring forecast following the pandemic with Gene Seawright, who's a certified management consultant and the principal of Seawright and Associates. So it's going to be a really good week rounded out. I'm grateful to my team for putting this content together, and we hope we'll have you back on another webinar this week, and then we've got a full agenda for next week as well. We hope you all are staying well. Thank you for joining in with us today. And again, my huge thanks go to Mike Gelman for his time and expertise. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon.